Well, good morning. Happy to see you all again. Once again, we're having an exciting, entertaining program by a distinguished historian, raconteur, and he will be sharing with us a number of good Ozark stories. I'd like to remind you again that we're here with the good graces of Barb and Joe Reich, who allow the museum to occupy these premises. We're always grateful for that. Next month's program is Rob McCormick, a very good photographer, who's coming with a book entitled Abandoned Ozarks, photographs of various sites and buildings, and had been buildings in the Ozarks. I hope you look forward to that the third Tuesday of next month, and we'll welcome you back. Meanwhile, Rick, here's the microphone for you to tell us all you know.
Well, that wouldn't take long, so I'm going to have to invent some stuff. But first, I'm going to admit I might be a little off my game, because I kind of had not a tragedy, because he is right with the Lord, but I got a call the other evening that a friend of mine's father had passed. Well, that happens. You know, he's kind of long in the tooth like me, and I was actually closer to him than the son that called me. And he asked, he said, Rick, would you say a few words over at the interment, you know, and a lot of us now are doing a lot of graveside services only, and I understood. And he said, no, we're going to bury Dad out at the family farm on Blair's Creek, the family cemetery. He said, you know how to get there. Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but you kind of hate to admit that you've forgotten stuff. So I said, sure, I know how to get there. Well, I pile on too many things, you know, and in fact, just a month ago, I was right here listening to a good friend of mine speak, and I just told my wife that morning that, honey, I've got to cut back. Somehow, 2 hours later, I was booked to be here. So anyhow, I was kind of running behind, and I thought, well, I'll take the back way to Blair's Creek. Anybody here ever been to Blair's Creek? You've been to Simmer, right there. So I took the back way, and I thought, well, I can find it. Well, the back way is a little rougher, and I busted a tire. So now I'm running even later. Well, I changed the tire. I see this old house and stuff, and I think, yeah, that's the Williams place. And then I see some people back there, not that far behind the house, shoveling dirt. I thought, yeah, that's. So I pull in, but the cemetery, I mean, the nice awning's gone, the hearse is gone, most of the family's gone, and I felt horrible. But I just promised to say words to them. And I thought, well, you know, promise is a promise. So I got out with my Bible, walked over, and these gentlemen, when they saw the Bible, and of course I had my hat off, they immediately put their shovels down, and they, see, some of them's hurt my sad tale. They put their shovels down, and of course the family wasn't there, so I didn't call my name, and I reminded the listening, and they were very attentive, had their hands folded reverently, and I said, you know, we're just, Lord, we're just burying a vessel, an empty vessel. There's no life in it. And they nodded, and I said, we thank you for that, and I said, we thank you for making homes for the souls that no longer here. Said amen, they amen, put their hats on, and one of them walked over. And I was about to thank him for being so reverent, but before I could, he shook my hand, and he said, that's as fine a word as I've ever heard said over a septic tank. So maybe I wasn't at the right house. If you don't care real quick, you gentlemen, let's take our hats off and bow, and we're going to go to the Lord in prayer. Dear God, let these words be inspirational, and let them honor you, and let inspire others to do likewise. And give me words that do such. We ask all this in your Son's name. Amen. Amen. Now, we're going to circle back to both of them here in a minute. And by the way, storytellers, Mitch Jane, how many here knew Mitch Jane? Anybody? I almost guarantee you every one of you has seen him. Right there, there's some friends that knew him. But I almost guarantee you seen the Andy Griffith Show?
Oh, yeah.
The Darling Family?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The Boys That Never Spoke? Well, Mitch was the bass player with the pipe in his mouth. Yeah. but a gifted writer. Several books. In fact, one of his books made it to Hollywood, and the same guy that ripped the sink out of the floor and one flew over a cuckoo's nest, Will Sampson, played the lead character in Old Fish Hawk, which was written by Mitch Jane. Yeah. But anyhow, he told me years ago, he said, a good storyteller is a lot like a good rabbit dog. He said, son, it's just nature that you'll meander around as long as you always come back, you know. So we'll get back to that story and that prayer here in a second. And I've got notes I'm going to refer to occasionally because my mind's not what it was, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it, Rick Mansfield is so nicely introduced me. I've been storytelling for years. Now, teachers and preachers called it lying when I was young, you know. And in fact, that's what led me to that, was I had kind of an aversion for the truth. And I realized that I wasn't growing out of it, as Reverend Brooker pointed out numerous times. And so he didn't say this, but I saw this looking around, because I was kind of sharp. I saw that basically my professional past lay in being a lawyer, being a politician, sadly maybe even being a preacher, or just owning it and being a storyteller. And so I did, and I was friends with Mitch Jane, and he kind of tutored me. He told me numerous times, now Rick, don't ever let the truth get in the way of a good tale. Don't you? So, but a lot of what I'm going to tell you today is the truth. I actually auctioneered my first pie supper at 14 years old. I'd been on my own for a while, and the community really didn't know that much what to make of me, because I was in school some and I was gone some. People would run into me at truck stops in Arkansas, and you know, and potentially they didn't run into me in Florida, because my one trip to Florida, I didn't meet anybody that spoke English all the way down and back. But that's 50 years ago, you know. But I was at Timber Lodge, was an old K, well, it wasn't K, it was 1 through 8 schoolhouse, a pretty nice one for the time. And we had pie suppers there, and we had a preacher, Max Petmeyer, that could have done Ichabod Crane. He'd wring his hands and get nervous. Well, not a lot of our pie suppers. And how many here have been to a pie supper? See, there you go. I was somewhere, and the other day nobody had. Well, we were having the fundraiser that night for the Heart Fund, and a gal from St. Louis had come down to collect the money and kind of overlook it. They'd got a local band, and I think little Jimmy Orchard was part of it, and then they got an auctioneer, and he was known to sip a little. Now, these were Christian occasions, and just like we had a prayer a while ago, every pie supper I've ever done, but most of them I attended started with a prayer, but certainly every one I've done started with a prayer. Having said that, and the Lord himself turned water into wine. Having said that, there were a lot of people that sometime during the pie supper slipped out to their car to relubricate their bidding voice. But the auctioneer that night that was known to sip, evidently that night had slurped. And he wasn't able to cast, as we hunters say. And so the preacher came back there, and he's wringing his hands, and you know, it's time. And he's just, well, Tony Weber, who's long since, I had the privilege of preaching words over him, and it wasn't a septic tank, it was really Tony, years ago. But he was like a father to me, and I really believed if he said I could do something, I could do it. Twice in my life, and those of you that this might mean something to, twice in my life I shouldered a switch tie, a 7-9 switch tie, and carried it around Gene Ball's mill, which was a little larger than a football field, the perimeter. That's probably 800 pounds, and did it because Tony told me I could do it. Yeah. I found out years later when Gene Ball was dying, I went to see him, and he told me something. When I went back to Tony, I told him, I said, you need to see how that rabbit dog we circle, but we'll come back. I told Tony, I said, you need to get up there and see him. He said, well, is he about to go? I said, well, I don't know how quick he's going to die, but his mind's already gone. He said, what makes you think that? I said, well, remember when I carried that switch tie those 2 times? I said, and he said, oh, yeah. He said, he thinks that cost him $1,500. And he kind of griped about it. And he said, son, it did. He said, first time I bet him $500, about 18 months later, he didn't think you could do it again. I bet him $1,000. I said, well, how come I'm just now 30 years later hearing about this? Now, he had a valid point. He said, now, if you hadn't done it, and you'd have collapsed with 800 pounds of green wood on you, how would you have felt if I'd come over and said, son, if you're still alive, you owe 250 to that man? Now, he had a point. I wouldn't have wanted to hurt that. And he said, plus, he said, back then, once was before, I guess both times I was out of the service, but he said, back then, he said, son, you just spend it on dogs or women. He said, I invested it. He said, plus, he said, if you remember both times I did buy lunch that day. So he did have a kind of point. But anyhow, I was 14 at this time. He looked around at the preacher and he said, the boy here, he's an auctioneer. And Max said, really? He said, yeah. He said, I seen him in school, paid for it all. Well, I was gone just enough. People didn't know where I'd been. And he said, I'd just be blanked if I'm going to call him Colonel. But yeah, he's an auctioneer. And oh, he was just so relieved. He said, I'm going to go tell the band, play one more song. We'll get this started. Well, I'm still just standing there, you know. And the lady standing there, she said, oh, you look so young and so excited. And Tony said, I tell you what, he said, most of these people have never been to a cattle auction. And she said, no, I've never been to a cattle auction. He said, have you even been to a timber auction? No, I've never been to a timber auction. He said, well, I tell you what, he said, why don't you slow it down for them tonight? Well, I saw relief coming. And that lady, I never will forget, looked at me and said, you, after all that training, you can slow it down? And he goes, oh, he's talking his class. Talking his class. And so I slowed it down. In their mind. In my mind, it's as fast as I could, a 14-year-old auctioneer. And now, 50-some years later, that's basically the speed I've stuck with. And it works. But for those of you that haven't been to pie suppers, they're wonderful events. Ladies, and by the way, if I offend anybody, I'll pray for you, but we got men and women. That's what God invented, and that's what my 8th grade biology book tells me. And if you just go out to the farm, that's what you'll find. But women would bring a pie. Men would bring cash. And now I do a lot of pie auctions now that are fundraisers, but a true pie supper, ladies they'd write their name on the bottom of that box and kind of hide it. Now, if they had a beau or a husband or something, of course they knew it was theirs. If they wanted a beau or wanted being courted, well, they'd let that slip. Hey, mine's got, make sure Fred knows mine's in the pink ribbon. Mm-hmm. But, and then whoever bid the most for that pie, at the end of the bidding, and in the evening, we had tables and stuff, and the lady would serve the gentleman. So it was a wonderful fundraiser because there was no overhead. The music was always free because when I grew up in the Ozarks, and it was very similar to Stone, Christian County, Shannon County, Reynolds, Carter, I've heard it said more than once, if you swing a dead cat, you'd hit a fiddle player. You get in a crowd of people, you swing a dead cat, you're going to hit a fiddle player. And if you swing it 2 or 3 circles and the tail break off and it goes flying off, because it will. If you swing a dead cat, don't make that 3rd circle because the tail will break off. Well, then it flies out there, more likely to hit a banjo player. So music was easy to come by. But the lady would serve the gentleman so they'd get to kind of commune with each other. And it's kind of courtship in many ways. And older people loved it because those of you got kids, grandkids out here courting, maybe your girl was old enough to be courted, maybe you let them bring a pie and the other gentleman buy it and serve them. But they were just right here at this table, you was just right over here. Or Uncle so-and-so was right over there or somebody. So it was a very structured courtship. But now, we'll get to cakewalks in a second. Because not everybody bought a pie. Not everybody wanted courted. If you had girls too young, but wanted to bake something and contribute. If you had a lady that was widowed, maybe. Or she had a husband, but he was in the service away, or back in the 50s, 60s. I was more involved late 60s, 70s, 80s. If they were working construction or something, they didn't get home every weekend. So it wouldn't be fair for them to bring a pie without their husband there to bid on. So they'd bring cakes. Now the cakes wouldn't be hid in a box or anything. They'd just be out there for the world to see on a nice plate or something. They'd be on a table by themselves. And then we would put numbers. Sometimes we had numbers on paper. Sometimes in old schoolhouse we just used chalk and write, and then later the kids would scuff them out. And then we'd have numbers in a hat. And music would start a little bit like musical chairs with free pastry. And music, you'd pay 50 cents, and even that was kind of a courtship thing. Because say like maybe I wanted this pretty girl's pie later, but I might get it, might not. But if I went up and said, would you do me the honor of walking this cakewalk with me, I sure got to hold your hand for a little bit. Now, the other thing I'd do, if I paid 50 cents to walk with a pretty girl, I didn't care if I wanted cake. But if I paid 50 cents, well, that band, that music picker, he could just play 3 measures or whatever, quit, or he could play 3 minutes. So I'd slip him, and back when I was courting people, 50 cents was the going rate for a couple of cakewalks. I'd slip another 50 cents to the fiddle player to make it a long song. I didn't figure, I'm not as sharp as what I look. Well, maybe I probably am, that's the problem. I didn't figure out that 20 or 30 years later, that fiddle player that's volunteering his time, every young buck was slipping him 50 cents and playing on it. He probably left for $10 or $15 that time. But back to the pie. We grew up pretty much equally poor, so the huge advantage of that for a young lady was anybody, even back then, now you can Google all sorts of wonderful prose and poetry, but back then you could go to the library and check out Elizabeth Browning's book or Emily Dickinson or something and say something kind of flowery. But girls knew you really cared if you bought their pie, because if you're all equally poor, the only way I can assure myself that I'm going to get your pie is I work extra jobs that 2 or 3 weeks leading up to it. Or I sell something precious, I'm going to tell you a true story. There was a girl in Bunker, Tina Widger. I shouldn't have said the last name. We'll cut that out. But Tina, beautiful red hair, green eyes, and by the way, that's like less than 5% of the population in the world, red hair and green eyes. Now, the only problem was she already had a fiance. Now, that's not all that bad. Because in my mind, if you've already got a fiance, you're in a marrying mood, you're just confused about who to partner up with. But sadly, her fiance was the banker's son. So he wasn't equally poor. So I hauled hay at nights, I cut cordwood on weekend, I was working during the week, but I realized he's going to come a little better healed than I am. I had a pack. Anybody here familiar with hunting dogs? And you've got field trials where you compete speed or whatever, but then you have confirmation, just their looks, like the Westminster Kennel Club now. It's all about looks pretty much. So we had both. And I had 3 hounds that were lemon colored Julys, all female, just looked identical. And so I won best in pack. I'd been winning best in pack for 2.5 years. And people was tired of it. And so I went to some of them and said, guys, you want me to quit winning best in pack? Buy one of them. It'll cost you. And this is 50 years ago. They paid big money just to get one of them so that I no longer have best in pack. But that night, I did buy Tina's pie. Fooled the banker's son. He probably had that kind of money, but he wasn't going to spend it. Tina served me, and when he came over after about 20 minutes, said, hey, let's, and she said, no, Rick bought my pie tonight, with him. And that's the end. And Tina and I are happily married today. She married a banjo picker from Rolla. I married a school teacher from Salem. But we're both happily married. See that rabbit thing? You got to be careful. You get on the wrong track. Circling back real quick, that first thing I told you was a joke. I do preach a lot of funerals, but the septic tank thing, actually I thank Wayne Roden for that one. But one of the things from pie suppers, we like somebody in the crowd that's going to bid. I remind people what they've heard from my voice for years is this ain't Walmart. We're here for a good cause. And there's not going to be cheap pies, but you need somebody out there. Because even you might pay $100 for a pie, but you'll pay $20 if you can get it for that. So I need somebody out there. And Bill Ellerman for years just had a standing, I'm going back years, $5. He started every pie at $5. But he got to come to the front room and tell the joke first. When he passed away, Norman Light came up to me at the next pie supper and he said, Bill's gone. He said, things have changed. He said, I'll start them all at 10, but I get to tell a joke. Now, he had been an over-the-road trucker for years, so I had to screen the first 2 or 3 before I gave him a thumbs up on about the 4th one. Well, a few years ago, and we were just talking about him a while ago, Ray Joe Hastings, wonderful man, and auctioneered a pie supper down there in Donovan. And bless his heart, he started every pie that night at $25. But he got to tell a joke, and I'll share that one. There was a farmer down by the river plowing. This is probably back in the 60s, using a team of mules, of course. And some, I don't like to say tree huggers, but some naturalists or something, which I'm for that. I mean, I was a logger, and I want to preserve trees. So I don't want to ever denigrate that. But anyhow, they came, they weren't used to area and stuff, and they were hiking, they had their little compass and maps and stuff. Well, they hollered enough and finally got this farmer's attention. And so the farmer stepped away from the mules, were kind of taking the chance to rest. They were kind of what we call blowing, and he stepped over and he said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Yes. Yes, how do you get to the other side?" The farmer looked around. "You're on the other side." He went back to the pie. So that's in honor of Ray Joe Hastings. All right. Now, I've got 2 books I was going to read a passage from if I can find them real quick. And hopefully you buy these. These are wonderful books. And I give God credit because when I write, I truly feel inspired. But this is Riverman's Legacy. By the way, my favorite book. And it's got the short story, this collection of short stories. Think of James Michener. These short stories in here at the very back tell you what's fiction and what's not. When you read The Blizzard Brunch, you read about the old boy that started to eat a fillet of fish on this really horrific fish fry. I mean, wind is blowing 30 miles an hour, it's like 3 degrees. And he scooped it out of the hot grease with the seine, and he thought, wait a minute, they're not filleting fish, they're just scoring them on their spine. And they thought, oh, that's right, that one guy cut a slab off his hand. Well, sadly, that story's 99% true, and right there is the scar where I cut the slab off. Yeah. So, anyhow, here we go. Sally retied the ribbon for the 3rd time. There, the bow looked just right. Cutting off the extra length, she then used the scissors to curl both ends. Noting one of the pieces is well over 1 foot in length, she decided to wear it in her hair. Her decision on how to wear her hair was now made. Definitely a ponytail. Her blue gingham dress would match the ribbons in her hair and securing her pie box. The earlier signing of her name on the bottom of the box now seems superfluous, at least to the observant bidder. Still, it was a custom so that the young man willing to pay the highest price would be able to identify the lady who baked the pie and with whom he'd be eating. This is the end of the story. "Do you mind if I ask a question? Where did you get that lovely ribbon?" he went on. As he waited for an answer, he could see himself still taking it from his pocket and sticking it on a crevice of a wagon where he'd first arrived at the community and stopped by the general store. He'd helped his cousin load his wagon and then sat down in this wagon to rest, feeling the length of ribbon he'd bought from St. Louis in his pocket. He did not wish to get it even dirtier as he had another wagon load. Matt could still hear Laura's voice as she informed him she was returning east and that the long blue ribbon from her bonnet was all he would have of her. See, highly paid storytellers have professional page turners. You didn't know it was that hard, did you? He would ever have. It had not even been a fight, just a separation from dreams from reality. "I found it," Sally was answering. "It seems like when you need something nice and pretty in your life, God provides it." How very true, thought Matt as he continued to savor perhaps the most delicious treat he'd ever held in his mouth, or in his eyes. The pie supper. It's in this book. This book is one of the 2 I wrote this year. I'm really behind. The first thing Zoe noticed was the building was of rock. Not many homes around Salem that she'd seen were built like this, and certainly not her own church. It was brick. As people began to leave, the amount raised was announced, the final prayer led by a member of the band. Before loading up their equipment, they played another couple of songs. One was one of her favorites, Amazing Grace. Zoe fell asleep on the almost hour-long drive home. Megan driving slowly up the section of highway called the Devil's Backbone. Noted the irony of its proximity to the old church. Wrestled with several thoughts. Happiness that her young daughter had had so much fun. Honored to have been a part of such a worthy cause. Pleased that there were still people and events that did not utilize or allow alcohol and disrespectful language. Joy from the music and lyrics she had heard. Many reminded her of her own youth. Megan also admitted to herself that she was a bit anxious. She knew that before long Zoe would not be as much a pretty kid as a lovely young girl. Realized in today's world what all that would mean. Hoped that when she was ready to be courted in a decade or so, Zoe would still have such old-fashioned pie suppers to attend. Megan silently said a prayer to that end, as well as a prayer of thanks for the evening she had just shared with the daughter she loved so very much, and for the community that hosted it, even for the church in which it was held. Proceeds from this book, today they go to this museum, but my wife and I will be donating $5 for every book sold, because that's what I pledged to the church. Go to the restoration of a church built in 1948. You can learn some of its history in that. Now, if I can manage this real quick, and if I can, it's certainly not Curtis's fault. We're going to go through, how am I on time? Oh, geez. Well, no, I'm doing great. You know what that is. Left, right? Mm-hmm. There's the Mount Zion Church setting of Zoe's first pie supper. Started in 1938 and 39 by a group of people, a grandmother who looked up and said, I want some place where I can worship my Lord in the community and not have to get in a buckboard and travel 20 or 30 miles. And any of you been on the Upper Current, this is right above Acres where the Acres Ferry was, on Upper Current. It was finished, but the war intervened, finished in 1948. They actually had service and several things. In fact, doing some research recently, and there's going to be another version of this book, or another edition, I guess they call it. But in 1939, they just barely started it, but they held a pie supper because they talked about a fundraiser with somebody brought a jar of pickles, a pair of socks, and numerous pies and cakes. Well, that's a pie supper. Because I don't know if I covered earlier, pie suppers had the cake walk, had the pie auction, but they also had just silly events. And one would be, and it back then, a penny a vote, still is a penny a vote, most people just now vote $1 at a time. And you'd give like 3 minutes, prettiest girl, and people would be nominated for the prettiest girl, and prettiest girl won a cake or something. Lovesick couple, got a jar of pickles. Dirtiest feet, got a bar of soap. We used to, and this was kind of a subtle way you could kind of let some women know, dirtiest housekeeper would win a broom. Now, if you're nominated, this is hilarious, if you're nominated, while you're in the lead, you have to hold the item. Which for the cake and the bar of soap's not that big a deal. If you're nominated for dirtiest feet, though, you do have to take off at least a shoe and sit there and show your socks at least. But henpecked husband, we give a live rooster. And so if you're in the lead, you have to hold the rooster. And that can be hilarious for people that have never held a rooster much. But anyhow, in 1939, they had one of their first fundraisers, but it was finally, given the war and everything, finally finished in 1948. We think that we're trying real hard to get that on the list of historical buildings that need restored. I was honored a few years ago, and I'll be back coming October, a year from now. Mark your calendars, talking about Henry Schoolcraft's walk. But during that walk, I got to present the Christmas message, and we have church there about twice a year now. And the lady on your right would be basically a sister. It's Buck Maggart's daughter, Judy Maggart Stewart, and she's the president of a new 501c3 called Friends from Mount Zion. There's Zoe. Those of you that buy books, sadly she's not here to sign it, but she was at a book signing, and that for that little girl, the book was written, it just got published this year, but the pie supper is based on is several years old. And she was like 6 or 7, but she's just like 10 or something now. And she was ecstatic. She got to attend a book signing and sign her name. She was just, that was neat. I'm a big believer in that. Therefore, as you have opportunity to do good to all people, when we look at everything wrong with this world, I'm going to quote Bill Clinton to the surprise of a lot of our Republican friends. Nothing wrong with this country can't be fixed by more of what's right with this country. We got opportunities to help people all the time. And as far as us looking at this next generation, if they're not what they should be, we've raised them.
That's right.
But they're full of lots of good. I encounter wonderful people all the time. See, he's a kid to me, and it's wonderful. He and his wife and kids. Yeah. This just examples me auctioneering. And sometimes if they don't have enough stuff, I donate books a lot of times. In fact, I donate books at an auction the other night. 6 books brought $180. So. Cakewalks, this is what I was talking about. I've done them all sorts, but I've done them in schools, I've done them at campgrounds. I just think it's a wonderful tradition. More cakewalks. Other pie supper events. Here we go, dirtiest feet and henpecked husband. Now, Dave told me one dirtiest feet, so he's there showing off his sock and I think he's got a bar of soap in his hand. The girls on the other side, and they're still helping me. I do a fundraiser. I'm privileged to do a fundraiser. I've done it 24 years now, I think, at Bunker for the Bunker Volunteer Fire Department. And these young girls are my current pie holders and stuff, but this was a picture of them a few years ago because I think they're 15 and 16 now. But we couldn't find a rooster. So if you look close, that's a turkey. Oh. So henpecked husband got to hold like a 30-some pound turkey. When I wanted to bring this as close to Stone County as I could. So this is a book, D.D. McWilliams' book. If what I found was correct, it's published in 1983. Life of a Real Ozark Hillbilly, and on page 41 talks about pie suppers. Then, thanks to, not Donna, Chris, help me, who's the gal up at the museum? Doreen, thank you, Jim. Doreen did a lot of research for me. So these are just some of the media coverage. In 15, this is 15, 17. Pie supper was held at Inman Schoolhouse. And see, this surprised me. I've never seen this award till I did this research. Poor J.F. Akers, yet several people nominated, Mr. Klont and Mr. Rhodes, but J.F. Akers was voted as the ugliest man. He won that. You see, I had mixed feelings when I saw that because I thought, had we had that when I was young, I could have won something. This was benefit for the band. Times have changed. 1918, of course, what have we got going on? Well, actually, it was called the Great War. It wasn't named World War I yet, but you're right. What would be known as World War I. The Great War. Pie supper at Cave Springs raised $35 given to the Red Cross. Pie supper at Esley Saturday night, June 22nd, for the benefit of the Red Cross. Pie suppers mirrored our communities. Tragedy, locally, tragedy nationally, celebration nationally. 2025 will raise money for a basketball team. Ponce de Leon, which is a neat little community. It's too late to get in last week's, but 1925. And this, a lot of pie suppers that I auctioned had chili supper or something leading up and then live music. But some of the pie suppers, and I attended a few, but back then it was more common, instead of the live music, they had a program or something. They might have kids doing skits or recitations, which I thought that was really neat. We move along to 26, 27, times are good, we're not warring or anything. So this was secured playground equipment. And these are all local, most of them Stone County. Raised $14 and be used for different articles needed for the school building. Pie supper at the electric building. And be used in preparation, for a Christmas tree. 1938, 1942, and we're back to that poor guy. 1938, we're awarding somebody, a popular girl. 1942, we're awarding somebody for being ugly once again. But see, we joke, but back then we could laugh at ourselves. Yeah. Circling back, I told you I'd circle back around at the start of this. I told the joke, this was in homage to the people that raised bids for, Norman Light, Bill Etterman, Ray Joe Hastings, and we had a prayer. On my part is sincere, I'm sure as was yours. You just need to travel and get out much to see how rare it is that I could stand before a public audience and say, gentlemen, will you bury your heads? And we go to our Lord in prayer without booed and hissed. I was at a Park Service event several years ago, and I was there representing my organization. It was our Heritage Project, and they had a facilitator that they bragged on because he'd been facilitating these meetings for 10 years. So if you did one a week, that's 500. If you did one a month, that's 120. Well, we came to lunch, and I just raised my hand and said, is somebody going to bless the food? He turned and looked at the chief ranger and said, I've never been asked that. So like I said, if he just did one a month, he's done 120 around the nation and never been asked that. And I just walked up and brushed him away from the podium, and I said, he said, let's take a vote. And sure enough, and 2 or 3 people, anybody against it, 2 or 3 hands stuck. And I just stepped up there and brushed him away, and I said, we don't vote about honoring our Lord here. And so I'm glad we did that, but I did that for a reason. Because I'd prayed before about, you please let me be inspiring. But you just need to, if you ever wonder why we appreciate the Ozarks, October 17th, 2023, we can still publicly, don't even think about it. Don't even think about, well, of course we'll take our hats off in that prayer. That's a blessing right there.
It is.
Band uniforms, and then over here, we're raising money for defense bonds. And that would be the war that makes us name the first one Lord, and then the second one too. Lovesick couples in 42, the war chest drive in 44. I need to do one more thing real quick. Chris, you've been such a blessing. Come on up here real quick if you don't mind.
Are you auctioning off a date with me?
No, I'm not. I'm not. But I'm going to borrow this gentleman right here in the green shirt. Yeah, that's you.
Me?
Yes. See, just my luck, I picked one that's colorblind. Now, I do this all the time. And
We go to church together, so he knows my husband.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want you to watch closely, okay? I'm going to set this down.
Uh-oh.
Rick Mansfield.
Buddy Burns.
Rick Mansfield.
Oh, Chris Buckins.
See, COVID, we forgot about it. What did I do different between shaking this gentleman's hand and this young lady's?
Honored her.
Exactly. See, I thought somebody just say took my hat off, but honored her. Now, did I do that because she's a member of the weaker sex before you answer get in trouble? We'd have never settled the Ozarks. We'd have never settled this country. We'd have never fought back fascism, totalitarianism on a global scale twice. That would be your World War I and II. We'd have never won our independence. And to try to put this in perspective today, because we think of Great Britain now, if you watch the news, there's a bunch of inbred rich people that are just nuts. Who's from, name a small town, somebody from a real small town.
Jacksonville.
There you go. If Cassville looked up and said, let's get some new uniforms, right kind of a flowery intention, and then go up to New York and beat the New York Yankees at baseball. Guys, we see the movies, we've read the books, we've seen the television shows, we've seen arcades decorated with the Roman Empire. The British Empire was 7 times larger than the Roman Empire at the height of the Roman Empire. 7 times larger. And a group of people said, I'm going to choke up saying it, we're going to win our independence so that we can do as we want. We'd have never done all that without strong mothers, wives, sisters, daughters. Just like when you pray, like we did a while ago, you say thanks for food. When gentlemen meet a lady, they take their hats off because they're literally thanking God for the gift, thanking you for being the gift. So if you remember nothing else than that. When I do that with young men, I'll ask young boys sometimes, you got a pocket knife because in the Ozarks, and did your dad or grandpa, and inevitably, probably grandpa gave it to me, and I said, would you leave that out in the rain? Well, of course not. Would you loan it to me, and could I just kind of, well, no. I said, of course not. You treat that respectfully because your father or your grandfather gave it to you. I said, well, if that's how you treat a gift from your earthly father, then how should you treat your sister now, or your mother, later a girlfriend, later a wife or daughter, that's a gift from your Heavenly Father? One of the reasons I'm proud to, and I hope a lot of you buy books, because I told Jim, how many did I tell you I was going to 10 today, right?
Yes.
Let's just make it all of them. Every book you buy today, they get 100%. Okay? Ozark Heritage Project, we do a lot of things. I get choked up. We do river cleanups. We annually remove roughly 40 tons of debris from Missouri streams and riparian borders. And even that I love doing for a myriad of reasons, because I tell people, to me it's a wonderful metaphor. If you want a clean stream, you got to get the trash out. If you want to keep it clean, you got to get it out of what's called the riparian border, the river bottoms, the brush around, and all that. And the only reason we have these clean streams in the Ozarks is because of all these springs. Well, I tell young people from 8 to 80, if you want a clean life, you got to get the trash out. If you want to keep it clean, you got to get it out of the riparian borders. And I tell young people this, a good example is, well, I go to these parties where there's drinking and drugs, but I don't do it. But it's right there. You know, how long will that can be on the gravel bar before it's in the river? And we wouldn't have that shot at a clean life without the living water of Jesus. So to me, it's a calling. But we do a lot of things. We do river cleanups. This is where a few years ago, a group of students, one of my wife's favorite projects every year is working with the honors freshmen from Salem. We went down and painted the old barn there at Montauk. I do historical characters. This coming Saturday, I'm going to be Mr. Bunker that founded the city of Bunker. Yeah, in 1907. There I was Mr. Thomas Capps. I'm sure Curtis is familiar with Capps Hollow. Most of you float to the Lower Current River. It's below Round Springs. It's named after. We can't really find out, was it named after the family or the felon? But he broke out of the courthouse, which at the time wasn't much, and it was up near Round Springs on Current River, not where it is today on Jack's Fork and Emmons. And he had, it's a good reminder things can always be worse. He broke out and he had a ball and chain. He weighed about 15 pounds. The Shannon County Museum still has it, and you can kind of see it there. When I storytell, I use it and I attach it to my ankle. When he decided he needed it off, so the best they could tell, he got a rock and a hickory limb and tried to break the shackle. He broke his leg, and they found him there about 2 weeks later dead. So things, you know, just some of the projects, including that's a 1947 boat, a 1955 cooler, and a 1952 trailer that we restored. We've got about $7 grand in that we restored, and we take it around and storytell with it. There's some other events. We had a fundraiser. Actually took a real Ozark pie supper up to, you know, Joe Shaper, up near St. Clair, just this June 10th, it looks like. Just this last year, we actually had the cakewalk, the dirtiest feet, all those contests. We didn't have ugly, and I just don't know if I'm going to, you know. I've got some friends that don't win much. There's another OHP event, and then I thought, you know, everybody needs a cute picture. Those dogs are both passed. But doesn't that look like, you know, Hut 1, Hut 2, you know? I've got a book out there for sale. It's not featured in this, but it's got a wonderful picture of that dog on the front looking at a deer. Those aren't ponderings. I think that's it. Pleasant Thoughts. There's the little Zoe with her mother Megan. That was a real pie supper. That event was based on a real pie supper we had at Shenandoah Church, which is a sister church of Mount Zion. We had it for a Vietnam vet's family that he had passed, and he had a disabled daughter. And so it was based on a real event, and those pictures, if you buy or look at the book, are based on real photographs. Then this was just, you all get a handout today. It looks like we're going to have enough for everybody. So when you come out, whether you buy a book or not, you get a free handout. And one of the things, a little about pies and stuff, but the Magic Lantern is a story I wrote. It's supposed to be part of a trilogy when I finish. And there was a little boy that just... He had just heard that story with me, and he was holding the lantern. He got to hold the lantern while I told the story, and then when we got done, he was just a happy camper. So I'll leave you with some very pleasant thoughts. I'll be out. Well, first I'll take questions real quick. Any questions? I'm gonna get some water, but any questions? Either I didn't inspire questions or I just covered the material so well. You know. Yes, sir.
When did Spin the Bottle come in?
Spin the Bottle, to my knowledge, was at play parties, and the thing does say play parties, pie suppers, play parties, and prayers. Spin the Bottle was at play parties from the time that us preteens could sneak out of the parent sight and play it. I never saw it sanctioned by adults, but my earliest memory of a play party, and by play parties, we just get together in the community, sometimes at a house, sometimes at a barn, similar to a pie supper, and we just have games. Play all sorts of games. Adults sometimes would play horseshoes, you know, and stuff, but we kids, I know exactly when it came into my life. I was 12 years old, and Rebecca Heron showed up in blue jean shorts and a red cotton top, and I went somewhere and found a bottle, and we're playing Spin the Bottle. She insisted we get 2 or 3 more players, but yeah. Any questions whatsoever?
Any other questions?
Is Acres Ferry named after whom?
Acres Ferry is supposedly named after an Acres family, and there's a kid right now saying he's part kin to that. I don't know. I've helped with that cemetery and stuff up there for years, and I don't even know if in the Acres Cemetery there's any acres buried. I think they're over in the Purcell Cemetery that's all but abandoned across the river. And we talked about it being the first ferry. Obviously it wasn't the first ferry, but Buck Maggard's family started it in modern times. So in modern times it was the first ferry there, but there's no doubt it's... Any other questions at all? Yes, right here, my buddy.
Still running?
It is not. That's a whole sad deal, but it's not as one-sided as some of the families telling it. There were warnings and there were letters saying you need to do this if you want to keep your permit, and they didn't heed them. But no, a permit was taken from a family that had operated since the 1960s, and it's the part of the canoes permitted were sold to Darrell Blackwell, who's a cousin, bought them. But the ferry has not run for well over a year, and the building's been abandoned for well over a year. Supposedly it's going to get remodeled and open, but it's, you know, that's a supposed. Anything else now? Yes, right here, the lovely lady.
The Maggards you mentioned, are they from Bradleyville?
Originally?
Is there any that you're talking about?
The ones I'm talking about, I don't know all their kin. I had the privilege of being one of the ones that helped, I helped bury them 2 years ago. You know, the father-son died within like 3 days of each other of COVID. You know, I don't know. They're not originally, they're from Tennessee, the family was. And then they moved up to Minnesota for a while, and then he came back and married the Purcell girl. Started a grocery, and that little store at one time was kind of neat. And it's kind of heartbreaking when Judy Stewart that you saw earlier in there, Judy Maggard, she still remembers, I think she was 10 when they came and said, you've got 30 days to leave your home. And it's all the home she'd ever known. It's all the home that her father had ever known. But it was the center of the community for years. It had a barber shop. It had the old, and I don't know if it was salvaged or not, but it had the old, like you see on the Green Acres, you pull out the phone thing, plug them in. It had those, I guess they called it switchboard, but it had that. But I don't know. Anything else at all? I'm going to drink, but just...
Ring down. You ever called ring downs? Ring downs.
Oh, okay. I did not know. See, I learned something.
I worked it.
Oh, okay.
Well, thank you very much, Rick, for a highly entertaining program.
I'll be up there signing books.